Well, we begin in Sudan, where another ceasefire has come into effect after 10 days of heavy fighting. This three-day truce was brokered by the United States. Several ceasefires between Sudan's army and the Rapid Support Forces have failed to hold, and at least 427 people have been killed in the conflict. The UN says the situation has pushed the country to the edge of the abyss. Our correspondent Hiba reports from the ground there in Khartoum.
More deaths in Sudan's capital, Khartoum. Several people were killed in an airstrike in the southern city of Kalakla on Monday, adding to the growing number of civilian deaths. The paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, is accusing the army of directly targeting civilians. But the army says the RSF troops are hiding in civilian areas and using people as human shields. And after nearly 2 weeks of fighting, the RSF field commanders say their troops control areas in the southeast of the capital. The battle has intensified around Khartoum airport, and the fight for information has become just as crucial. Here, the RSF says it maintains its presence.
To all those listening to any false rumors that RSF are in control of the General Command or the airport, we are now inside both facilities.
But Sudan's army denies giving up power.
As you can see from the green square, up to this point, there is nothing but the army personnel. They're now combing the area for RSF fighters.
The army released video of what it says are Rapid Support Forces fighters surrendering in Al-Fashaga Al-Sughra in the southeast, and the general meeting troops in the main command of the army in Khartoum. The conflict has led to a major humanitarian crisis. Millions of people in the capital are trapped in their homes, with power outages, no running water, and lack of food. The chaos has spread to state prisons, where hundreds of inmates from Kober National Prison have escaped. Others from Soba Prison were captured by RSF troops. While the fighting rages on, those who can are trying to flee. Several countries, including Italy, France, Germany, and Jordan, are the latest to pull out their diplomatic staff and foreign nationals. With no one to rescue them, Sudanese civilians are taking matters into their own hands to find safety. Some traveling by bus to cross into Egypt.
Getting out of Khartoum was definitely the most difficult part of this entire journey. Having to go through these checkpoints where you don't know whether you're going to be robbed or killed, or just holding my mother's hands, looking into my grandma's eyes, just all holding each other's hands and praying that it all goes smoothly.
But many still remain behind. Some say they can't afford to leave now because of fuel and transport costs. Online banking operations have stopped, and banks have been closed since the start of the fighting. And with a breakdown in telecommunications, many say they no longer know which routes out of Khartoum are safe. There have been more international and regional calls for mediation. Ethiopia's prime minister is appealing for both sides to talk.
I ask my brother Al-Burhan and my brother Hamidti to stop the fighting immediately and adopt dialogue.
Hiba, Al Jazeera, Khartoum.
Well, our correspondent Shihab Ratanzi is in Washington, D.C. with more on that US-brokered ceasefire.
I think it's very interesting just how much the US is trying to stress it was involved in brokering this ceasefire. Following an intense negotiation over the past 48 hours, the US urges the SAF and RSF to immediately and fully uphold the ceasefire. But there is another element too. That is, the US says it's setting up some sort of unit involving regional and international partners, quote, to assist in the creation of a committee to oversee the negotiation, conclusion and implementation of a permanent cessation of hostilities and humanitarian arrangements in Sudan. So the US trying to show now that it is actively involved in trying to broker stability in Sudan. It's a fascinating position that the US finds itself in, and apparently caught completely flat-footed on that evacuation then. Yes, successful evacuation over the weekend. But the questions have been asked, well, look, after the evacuation of Kabul, we were told that lessons had been learned, and one of the key lessons was it has to be an early evacuation before chaos sets in. That's when you do your evacuation. That hasn't happened here. I mean, clearly these are different situations. And then there's the matter of the 16,000 or so American citizens still in Sudan. And last week, the message was very uncompromising saying, look, we've told them for years that not to be there, it's very dangerous, we have no obligation. That position has come under criticism, and now we're at a much more conciliatory position saying, look, we will try and help. Some acknowledgement that the US will try and help those Americans trapped in Sudan, and perhaps even try and, well, they say try and have some sort of consular presence in Port Sudan, but there's certainly been a softening there because there was a suggestion that the US just seemed to have washed their hands of the whole issue.
Well, Egypt's foreign ministry says an employee at its embassy in Khartoum has been killed in the fighting. Mohammed al-Gharawi was reportedly killed while driving to the embassy to follow up on evacuations for Egyptians stranded in the country. Well, foreign governments, meanwhile, are still scrambling to evacuate their citizens and diplomats from Sudan. A boat carrying nearly 200 people from 14 countries has now reached the Saudi city of Jeddah. Kenya has also just brought over its first batch of evacuees to Nairobi. Diplomats, aid workers and students have found themselves stuck in this conflict. Speaking at a Security Council meeting, UN Secretary-General Antony Guterres urged members to help pull the country back from catastrophe.
Since the start of fighting on 15 April, hundreds of people have been killed and thousands injured. The violence must stop. It risks a catastrophic conflagration within Sudan that could engulf the whole region and beyond. I strongly condemn the indiscriminate bombardment of civilian areas, including healthcare facilities. And I call on the parties to stop combat operations in densely populated areas and to allow unhindered humanitarian aid operations.
Well, Dr. Nada Fuddle is a Sudanese-American professor of medicine at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. She says the healthcare system was already dire before this conflict began.
We have to remember that this came on top of a broken and completely defunded healthcare system without any public health infrastructure that was damaged through the past 30 years of dictatorship. So for a war like this to hit a country like Sudan is going to cause massive consequences to the healthcare system. What I'm hearing from my colleagues is that they cannot even find sutures to suture wounds. They cannot find blood donation bags for those who are willing to donate. We have a team in Jazeera state that went trying to donate blood to the blood bank, and they were sent back because they didn't have actually blood bags to accept the donation. The situation is horrible in Khartoum, but it's also horrible in Niyala, in Al-Fashir, in the internal displaced camps in Wad Madani and other states where people are fleeing. There's a lot of injuries, and there's also the chronic diseases which are not being able to be managed right now. The ones who suffer the most is the civilian, the peaceful civilians who are trying to aspire for their dream of peace, freedom, and safety and justice for the past several years. And these are the entities that are suffering the most, whether it's from the lack of security, whether it's from lack of daily necessities such as food and water and electricity. Internet communication is spotty and cutting down. We're not able to launch our training program that we collaborated with Project ECHO in the past to train these healthcare personnel on how to provide first aid to injured people because of the spotty communication. But there's so many people suffering right now in Sudan just to be able to obtain food and water, those main basic necessities. And then the fear of safety, the fear that you could be at your home and could be attacked at any moment and displaced from your home, and you could be bombed at any moment. I mean, the terror, the emotional toll on these people is absolutely astronomical at this point. So there is an urgent call to the international community to try to create safe routes for people to exit Khartoum or for medical personnel to be able to provide safety and aid to those in need.
Well, many people are fleeing Sudan's capital in fear of worsening conditions there. Residents of Khartoum are filling all the available buses heading out of the city. Between 10 to 20,000 have already fled to Chad, which is already home to some 400,000 Sudanese refugees who fled previous conflicts. Many are seeking refuge to the north too, in Egypt, where they face overcrowding and an uncertain wait.
We would like to thank the Egyptian people and Egypt for the warm welcome, hosting and treatment. But there are some missing points I would like to point to. There's overcrowding and we need quicker services. People are coming with very high tension and panic from a state of war. So please, we need to deal with the situation quicker in dealing with the entry of people. I know the stress for the Egyptian authorities is very high.
There were clear breaches to the ceasefire. Sometimes I would be going to the supermarket to buy stuff for the children. Then the sound of gunfire would force you to go back and lock yourself up. The children would be under the bed. We put the bed mattress on the ground, and when the children hear gunfire, they go under the bed. The fear that we observed in our children, even us as adults, we comforted our children while we were scared. I hope the war ends and security and stability returns to Sudan and its people.